This first video is going to be an overview of Chapter 1, a short chapter on an introduction to chemistry. So before modern chemistry, ancients believed that we had four basic elements, so air, fire, water, and earth. And in fact, in 1783, Lavoisier, chemist, he decomposed water into the elements hydrogen and oxygen, which started to debunk this idea that we had only four basic elements. And now, with modern chemistry, we have over 100. Now, science is the methodical exploration of nature followed by a logical explanation of the observations. And an experiment involves scientists who explore nature according to a planned strategy and make observations under controlled conditions. And when you do laboratory experiments, we're going to be doing experiments where we're specifically trying to control our variables. We do have a strategy when we walk into a laboratory experiment. We're not just doing things randomly. This is how we practice science. The scientific method is a systematic investigation of nature that requires proposing an explanation for the results of an experiment in the form of a general principle. The initial tentative proposal we call a hypothesis, and then after further investigation, so further experimentation, we may reject the original hypothesis, revise it, or even accept it into a scientific principle. So this is the basic idea. Even in just general everyday life, it doesn't have to be in the chemistry lab. If you have a theory about something, you want to propose an explanation and then go ahead and test that. It could be even something as simple as trying to figure out, what food you're allergic to. If you think you might have a food allergy and you don't want to go to the doctor, you could do something like, okay, first I'm going to eliminate only dairy from my diet. That's an idea where you're proposing an explanation, I'm allergic to dairy, and then you run an experiment where you're only testing, am I allergic to dairy, by eliminating cheese and milk, etc. And then you either reject that idea that you're allergic to dairy or you change it. Try to test something else, maybe you try gluten. So step one, just in general, how we apply the scientific method, perform a planned experiment. So the key idea is, you're planning ahead of time. Make your observations and record your data. Step two, analyze the data and propose a tentative hypothesis to explain the experimental observations. And then we conduct additional experiments to test the hypothesis, to try and confirm our results, confirm our hypothesis, or refute it. If the evidence supports the initial proposal, the hypothesis may become a scientific theory. So this is if we're doing more longer-term experiments. So learning something new is the ultimate goal. So we'd have an observation about nature, and we'd form a hypothesis about it. Next thing that we would do is we would perform an experiment to try and reject or refute the hypothesis. And then if our experiment fails, we would do it again. And then we would do it again. And maybe we would revise the hypothesis and do it again and again. So science does not happen quickly. Usually it's over many, many, many years that we're conducting experiments, gathering data until we can come up with a firm idea on if our hypothesis is true or not. And when we finally think it's true, crafting that idea into either a theory or a law. Now, one example of a theory and a law that go together. So later on, we'll learn about something called the ideal gas law. And it's an equation. It looks like this, and I don't want you to worry about the details for right now, but the ideal gas law is something that we use to explain gases. And I say the word explain, but it's really more predict. So P stands for pressure, V stands for volume, N is a lowercase letter that we'll use for moles, even though moles starts with the letter M. R is the gas constant, and then T is for temperature. Now, the ideal gas law is just an equation. The theory that goes along with it, we call kinetic molecular theory. Now, kinetic molecular theory is something that tries to explain what we observe with the law. So the law is our observation of nature, how the pressure and the volume might change with temperature, and we can numerically calculate that with this equation. The theory is trying to explain all of that. So laws are usually equations, more surface level, and then theory tries to explain everything behind that. Other theories be like the theory of relativity, general theory of relativity, and I'm trying to think of some other ones. But the book, I think that, well, actually, I don't think the book goes through too many. But the point is that theories are usually trying to explain, and laws do not explain behavior, but they're just stating a measurable relationship. So then the next part of chapter 1 talks about all the different types of chemistry. So chemistry is a science that studies the composition of matter and its properties. Chemistry is divided into several branches, and we're only listing a few here. But this is fundamental chemistry, which is equivalent to like general chemistry on the college level. Next, if you were to major in chemistry, you would take organic chemistry, which is the study of substances containing carbon. So usually the word organic, colloquially, is referring to substances that, they have no pesticides, and maybe they were grown locally, hopefully as well. Organic, for the chemistry sense, just means the study of substances containing carbon, so molecules that contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And why that's important is because pretty much all of the molecules in your body we would classify as organic compounds. And there's a whole slew of organic reactions that we would want to study if we're wanting to be able to study the compounds in our body. Now, in organic chemistry, pretty much all the other substances, so substances that contain metals frequently falls under inorganic chemistry, but that's another course that you would take if you chose to major in chemistry. Biochemistry, so biochemistry comes after organic chemistry, but we're starting to study more substances specifically about plants and animals, getting more down into molecules that are in the cells and how those function and interact with proteins and that sort of thing. There's also physical chemistry. Physical chemistry starts to get into quantum mechanics and molecular orbitals and other interesting stuff like that. There's also radionuclear chemistry that talks about radiation. There's also analytical chemistry, where we really focus on instrumentation and taking measurements. And then newer field, green chemistry, so the design of chemical processes that reduce weight and hazardous materials. So chemistry can be a messy business, and so there's been a lot more push in the past several decades just to reduce waste. So reducing how much of a chemical you use, how much waste gets produced, because anytime you do a chemical experiment, you have waste, and we have to be able to neutralize that waste before we can dispose of it. So green chemistry is all about that. So like I said, chapter 1 is a pretty short chapter. So in summary, scientists use a scientific method to investigate the world around them. Experiments lead to a hypothesis, which may or may not lead to a theory or a law, and these two are related to each other. A theory tries to explain the law. Laws are usually just equations or relationships. Chemistry is a central science with many, many branches, and the impact of chemistry is felt in many aspects in our daily lives. So anytime you're in the kitchen, you're using chemistry. Anytime you're taking a medication, that involves some organic chemistry and biochemistry.